Good morning, everybody. The topic for today is monitoring in anesthesia. And here we will be covering the basic monitoring, which we usually do for a patient who is undergoing any type of anesthesia, regional or general. So, what are the basic monitors, how they have to be attached, what is the importance of them? So, this will be an overview of monitoring. So, what does monitoring mean to us? Monitoring means to interpret the available clinical data in a way which will help us to recognize what is the present condition of the patient, and at the same time it will help us in predicting any unfavorable system unfavorable condition which can be anticipated or unanticipated. So as anesthesiologist, our first and primary responsibility is to monitor the patient. So the question arises is, why do we need intraoperative monitoring? See, when we are giving anesthesia to patient, there are a lot of physiological changes which are going on with the patient. The homeostasis of the patient is disturbed, especially during induction and recovery. And apart from that, we all know that undergoing a surgery is a very stressful condition. It leads to sympathetic stimulation in the body, catecholamine surge, which can predispose to hypertension, tachycardias, and arrhythmias. Apart from that, the drugs which are used for general anesthesia and regional anesthesia, they can cause hemodynamic instability, myocardial depression, hypotension, and arrhythmias. And under GA, sometimes we have to put the patient on controlled ventilation. So the patient may be hypoventilated or hyperventilated, and that can itself lead to certain problems. Then, to maintain the temperature of the patient and to prevent the patient from developing any kind of hypothermia. Okay. So, all these things, how we will know? Only if we monitor the patient. So, the ASA, which is the American Society of Anesthesiologists, it prescribes some basic standards for intraoperative monitoring. Okay. So, according to ASA, there are two types of monitors, a standard 1 monitor and a standard 2 monitor. A standard 1 monitor, according to ASA, is a qualified anesthesia personnel who should be present in the room throughout the conduct of all type of cases under anesthesia, be it general or regional or a MAC sedation. Okay, MAC is monitored anesthesia care. A standard 2 monitor means during all anesthesia procedure, the patient's respiration, which includes the ventilatory parameters and the oxygenation parameters, patient's circulation, and patient's temperature should be continuously evaluated. So, in simple words, if you want to concisely say, basically, we are not supposed to start a surgery in the absence of any of these monitors. So the four basic monitors required for any patient undergoing surgery under anesthesia is ECG, SpO2, blood pressure, which can be non-invasive or invasive, and capnography. Apart from that, temperature monitoring is also included in this. So I already told you the most critical times in anesthesia, that is like induction and recovery. So it is like very important. It's like flying a plane. The takeoff and landing are very important steps. Similarly, induction and recovery are very important steps in anesthesia, and we expect a lot of hemodynamic changes during this period. So monitoring helps us in keeping a track of these changes. So if we talk about levels of monitoring, it can be classified as a routine monitoring or a specialized monitoring or extensive monitoring, or accordingly, it can be invasive monitoring or non-invasive monitoring. Then it can also be classified on the basis of systems, like it can be a respiratory monitoring, it can be a cardiovascular monitoring, it can be temperature related monitoring, neuromuscular monitoring, neurological monitoring, or renal monitoring. So course, in the past, we didn't have so many monitors. Only by visually seeing the chest rise and by having a hand on the pulse, that is how people used to conduct anesthesia. But with the advent of modern technology, modern anesthesia, Harvey Cushing, who is the father of anesthesia monitoring, he was the one who invented and popularized the anesthesia chart. And he said that recording the blood pressure and heart rate and the relationship between them is very, very important. This is what he is also the one who described the Cushing's reflex. So these are some multipara patient monitors which we have. So you can see in the first picture, the green one, first line topmost is the ECG. Then the red one, it is the invasive blood pressure. Then next is the plethysmograph used for SpO2 monitoring. Then it is the capnograph used for EtCO2 monitoring. Then there's 130 by 80, it is the non-blood pressure monitoring. And the 37.4 is the temperature monitoring. So these are all the basic monitors which we have been using daily. So apart from that, I was telling you there will be some specialized monitoring. So this first picture is showing a transesophageal echocardiography, which we use mainly in cardiac surgeries. Then we have the second one, a BISP monitor, which we use in neurological surgeries, and this evoke potential monitor. So we'll just go briefly about each kind of monitoring. So respiratory monitoring, as I told you, we have to involve both ventilation and oxygenation monitoring. So it can be clinically, wherein we will see the rate of respiration, the rhythm of respiration, the volume, tidal volume by looking at the chest rise. Then it is also by auscultation. We can use the normal stethoscope, precordial stethoscope, or esophageal stethoscope. And in anesthesia, when in controlled ventilation or in spontaneous ventilation, we have something called the reservoir bag. So by palpating the reservoir bag and assessing its movement, we can monitor the patient's ventilation. So these are the clinical parameters. Apart from that, we have some special devices also. Like we have a spirometer and airway pressure manometer. And if there is any kind of disconnection in the circuit, you will have circuit disconnection alarm. Then an important basic monitor was capnography. So capnography, it is basically the recording of the expired tidal expired CO2, which is being plotted against time. So whenever we are expiring using Beer-Lambert's law, basically this the instrument capnogram is based on Beer-Lambert law, and the exhaled volume of CO2, it is measured in that. And that after the measurement, the reading is displayed in the form of a numerical form also and a graphical form also. There are a lot of principles used for this. The most common which we are using is infrared spectrography. So there are some reasons for increase in EtCO2 and decrease in EtCO2. Normal EtCO2 or the end tidal CO2 will be around 35 to 45 millimeter of mercury. So if there is increase in EtCO2, we have some certain causes in mind, like increased muscle activity or shivering, or due to the release of tourniquet, bicarbonate infusion, hypoventilation, and decreased minute ventilation. All this causes increase in EtCO2. Similarly, hypothermia, decreased cardiac output, and increased minute ventilation, bronchospasm, all this leads to decreased EtCO2. So this I told you. So the capnogram can be two types, mainstream and side stream. And so this is the picture of a normal capnogram. Okay. So it will have like 4 faces. So there will be baseline, there will be an expiratory upstroke followed by an expiratory plateau. Then this point D is where this T is used as the EtCO2 value or the end tidal CO2 value, which is reflected as a number. And then we have the start of inspiration. Okay. So mainly where we are using this is ideally, as I told you, now any patient who is undergoing any type of anesthesia, it is mandated that we use EtCO2. But for a patient undergoing anesthesia under general anesthesia, it is very, very important. So it's basically, it helps in confirming the proper positioning of endotracheal tube. It helps in detecting and monitoring respiratory depression, in diagnosing any kind of hypoventilation or OSA. And if we want to make any changes in the ventilatory parameters which we have set, EtCO2 is our guide for doing that. This is the picture of if you accidentally do a esophageal intubation, this is how the EtCO2 will be. This is a normal EtCO2, and this is the EtCO2 of a esophageal intubation. Similarly, if the seal around the tube is not adequate, this kind of graph we'll get. Or in hypoventilation, the EtCO2 will keep rising. In hyperventilation, it will keep on decreasing. So these are the things. In obstruction, you'll have a upstroke. And this is a curare cleft, which is we give muscle relaxants during general anesthesia. So during the intraoperative period, when the patient is coming out of the effect of the muscle relaxant and some amount of spontaneous breathing starts coming, this curare cleft can be used to detect that. And this is a guide for us that we should top up the patient with the next dose of muscle relaxant. Okay. So this is a very dangerous situation that suddenly TCO2 is coming, and all of a sudden it stops. So the first thing which we'll do is we'll see if the patient is breathing and if the circuit connections are adequate. If there is any problem anywhere in the circuit from the tube, some airway obstruction or some dislodged airway, some disconnection, some malfunction. Otherwise, it can be pure apnea or embolism. So basically this EtCO2 more or less it corresponds to our arterial CO2 values. Okay. So this is about this. Then the other kind of monitor is we give a mixture of gases in general anesthesia, which includes oxygen, nitrous, air, and a combination of some volatile anesthetic agents. So these are also measured by infrared absorption using Beer-Lambert law. So it can be different methods are there. And okay, the another is oxygen analysis. To as I told you, when in the mixture of gases, we are giving oxygen also. So whenever a patient is under general anesthesia, minimum 33% of oxygen has to be given. We all know at room temperature and pressure, the FiO2 in the breathing air is 21%. But when we are giving anesthesia to the patient, it is our responsibility to ensure that the minimum FiO2 is at least 33%. So that has to be measured by oxygen analysis monitors. They are also based on different things like galvanic cell or piezoelectric crystals and etc. Then we have spirometry, of course. And the graph of spirometry can help us in determining the lung volumes and everything. So that were the ventilatory monitors. Then there were oxygenation monitors. So for oxygenation monitors, again, clinically, we can observe by observing the patient. So if a patient is hypoxic, he will show certain signs like sympathetic overactivity, impaired mental function, or the presence of cyanosis, which is a very ominous sign. Or in auscultation, we can have wheezing, crepitations. So that is clinical diagnosis. Apart from that, we have some monitoring devices like a ABG or a pulse oximeter. So pulse oximeter is our very important second monitor. So pulse oximeter combines the principle of two things, oximetry and plethysmography, and it is used non-invasively to measure the oxygen saturation in the arterial blood. So basically there will be a sensor which will contain a light source and a light detector, and it will be placed usually across a finger or a toe or sometimes earlobe or any other perfused tissue that can be easily trans-illuminated. Okay, so this is how it works. So this will be the light emitting diode, and this will be the sensor, and it will detect the flow of blood, and based on Beer-Lambert law principle, it is based. So we have these kind of probes. This is a reusable probe, which is most commonly used on a finger or two. So I've already told the sites of probe, there can be central sites or peripheral. We are mostly using peripheral, that is finger or toes. Apart from central, we can have tongue, forehead, cheek, nose, ear, pharynx, larynx, esophagus. So what is the use? This is the this pulse ox monitors graph. So it first of all, definitely it tells us about the oxygenation status. It also tells us about peripheral circulation status. Then it helps us in telling about vascular volume, sympathetic tone, etc. So the advantages, it's a non-invasive procedure, very fast, very accurate, and you have separate respiratory and circulatory variables and lightweight. So it's very economical also. But of course, sources of error are there, like it's very sensitive to motion. So if the patient is shivering, and similarly, it's very sensitive to temperature changes. Like if suddenly patient becomes hypothermic, it will not be able to detect. So these problems are there. So next we will go to, that was about the respiratory monitoring. So next we'll go to cardiovascular monitoring. So the routine monitoring is cardiac activity, which is measured by heart rate, electrocardiography, and non-invasive blood pressure. In advanced monitoring, we have a direct arterial blood pressure monitoring by invasive lines, or the cardiac filling pressure monitors using CVP and a pulmonary catheter. So we'll just discuss about electrocardiography. Okay, so electrocardiography, what all we can detect the rate, rhythm, we can detect any arrhythmias, any signs of ischemia, electrolyte imbalances, any drug toxicity like digoxin toxicity, etc., and the function of the pacemaker. So we have standard limb leads, unipolar chest leads, and bipolar leads. So these are the standard limb leads, left arm, right arm, and left leg. Then we have unipolar chest leads from V1 to V6. And we have bipolar leads. And we have augmented limb leads. Okay. So there are two types of system, the 3 electrode system and the 5 electrode system. So 3 electrode system is very simple and common. So in that we will put 3 electrodes on the right arm, left arm and left leg. But it's good for detecting normal like R waves and heart rate monitoring and all that. So detecting the R wave means that it can also be used for defibrillator and cardioverters. Okay. But if we want to detect some complex arrhythmias like bundle branch block and VTs and all that, then it will not be sufficient. So for that, we have this 5 electrode system. So in that, we'll put 5 leads, right arm, right leg, left leg, and V5 lead. So this is the V1 can be used for arrhythmia monitoring, and from V3 to V6, it can be used for ischemia monitoring. So this is the normal tracing of the ECG. We have a P wave, which signifies the atrial depolarization, followed by a QRS complex, which is for the ventricular depolarization, and the ST segment, and T wave, which is ventricular repolarization. Sometimes you get a U wave. Again, in ECG also, we can have artifacts, like you can have a loose or broken electrode, you can have a misplaced, wrongly placed leads. And if the patient is shivering or restless, at that time, these can affect it. So that was about the ECG. Then we have non-invasive blood pressure. So non-invasive blood pressure, we all know we use that Rowa-Roshi cuff, and the cuff is tight mostly at the level of about the level of brachial artery, and intermittent non-invasive measurement is done. Okay. So the blood pressure cuff is inflated and deflated. We usually set the time for 5 or 10 minutes, something like that. And there's no contraindication for using it except in a limb with AV fistula. So we all know the pressure at which the first Korsakoff sound is heard, it is the systolic pressure, and then it will gradually change. It will become slow, muffled, and finally absent. And diastolic pressure is recorded at phase 4 or 5. Okay. So the cuff length and cuff width. The cuff length should be equal to around 80% of the limb circumference, and the cuff width should be around 40% of the limb circumference. So because all these things affects the blood pressure. Okay. So apart from that, you should also check the peripheral pulses from time to time. The most commonly which we use are radial and dorsalis pedis. Apart from that, you can also check the superficial temporal artery. And you should also check the patient color for pallor. Okay. Especially in surgeries wherein we are expecting a high blood loss, looking for pallor in the tongues, conjunctiva, lips can be very useful. So this is about your, then we have this automated NIBP. Then we have direct measurement of arterial blood pressure. Basically, we put an invasive arterial line, and from that, we used to plot the graph, and from that, we can reduce the blood pressure. This is done mainly for advanced cardiac surgeries. So this is the waveform. So we'll skip this part. Next is a little about CVP monitoring. CVP is basically central venous pressure monitoring. So sometimes when we are doing surgeries where we expect major hemodynamic shifts, like if we are doing a laparotomy or a big hemoperitoneum, something like that. So we need to know the central venous pressure monitoring. So for that, commonly we use the IJV or the subclavian. We'll cannulate it with a CVP catheter, and we will have a tracing. The normal CVP value is 0 to 8 millimeter of mercury. So apart from that, the other uses from it can also be used for giving IV fluids and rapid infusion of fluids, especially if the patient is undergoing some major trauma, major surgery. And it can be used for giving drugs, antibiotics, etc. So this is the normal CVP graph. We have A, C, and V waves and 2 X and Y descents. So this will more or less correspond to our ECG waves. So, since we know CVP, we are cannulating the big central vein. We have something called PICC line, which is the peripherally inserted central line. So it is done to minimize infections, and it is less invasive. This is the CVP set. This is a Schwann-Ganz catheter. So then Advanced cardiac monitoring also includes the cardiac output monitoring, so which is done by thermodilution, dye dilution technique, TEE. We'll go to neurological monitoring. So neurological monitoring, again, we have clinical monitoring, EEG, BIS monitoring, evoked potentials, ICP monitoring, and cerebral blood flow monitoring. So clinical monitoring, of course, will include your GCS, which is the Glasgow Coma Scale. Apart from that, you will look into the eyes for pupils if they are dilated or constricted. Then under anesthesia, sometimes patients will have lacrimation, which means patient is having pain. Okay, sweating again, which is a warning sign of hypoventilation, or it can be because of hypoglycemia, or it can be because of some thyrotoxic crisis. So these are the clinical things we have to look for. Then we have EEG monitoring. So EEG is basically the recording of the electrical potentials which are generated by the cerebral cortex. Then we have BIS monitoring, or the bispectral index monitoring, which is used mainly in general anesthesia to detect how much aware the patient is. So basically, we put the BIS monitors and we record, and values are there from 0 to 100. Then we have evoked potential monitorings. Basically, we have stuff read about sensory potentials, motor potentials. These are mainly used in neuromuscular surgeries. So next is neuromuscular monitoring. So we have done with cardiovascular, respiratory, and neurological monitoring. Next is neuromuscular monitoring. So in neuromuscular monitoring, what all we check is basically clinically, we will see if this is mainly done at the end of the procedure. That is when the patient is coming out of general anesthesia and you want to shift the patient to recovery. There are certain things you want to confirm that the patient is out of the effect of the neuromuscular blockers which you had given. So the clinical tests for them are, you will ask the patient to cough. So if the patient is having an adequate cough and a deglutition reflex, then the patient should have a sustained head lift or leg lift for more than 5 seconds without support, a sustained hand grip, a sustained protrusion of tongue, and a sustained eye opening for more than 5 seconds. So these are the clinical methods to detect the neuromuscular activity. Apart from that, we have a PNS monitor. So it is mainly done only in like neuromuscular diseases, or if we have given anesthesia for a long period, some renal and hepatic diseases, transplants, etc. So we have a TO4, train of 4 monitoring, double burst stimulation, etc. Then in volume status and renal monitoring, mainly renal urine output. So adequately, it is around 1 ml per kg per hour. But if it is less than 0.5 ml per kg per hour, we consider is oliguria. Okay. Then, of course, we'll put in major surgeries, we'll put Foley's. Apart from that, if it's a patient of shock or a CCF, renal failure, hepatic disease, or some major cardiac surgery or aneurysm surgery, or some craniotomy, or some major surgery in which we expect large fluid shifts. So their definite indication is to put a urinary catheter and to measure the urine output. Then temperature, as I told you, it is very, very important. It is in fact included in the ASA basic monitor now. So hypothermia is defined as a body temperature less than 36 degrees Celsius, which is very, very frequent during anesthesia and surgery. Usually in a short duration procedure, like less than 15, 30, 20 minutes, it's okay. But beyond that, temperature monitoring is very, very important. So we can measure the core temperature at what all sites? It's nasopharynx, esophageal, lower end of the esophagus, tympanic membrane, by using a PA catheter in bladder and in the rectum. So the main aim is to prevent hypothermia and to treat it, because hypothermia will lead to a dangerous triad of cardiac arrhythmias, sepsis, coagulation defects. So it is important to timely detect it. So these were the basic monitoring. After extubation, we have discussed. So the rules never to forget, or in concise, what we want to say is never start or induce a case with a missing monitor. The important ones being ECG, NIBP, SpO2, and now also temperature. Never remove any monitor before extubation and recovery. Never ignore an alarm by the ventilator. Always check, check, check. Okay. And always remember that your clinical sense and judgment is better than any monitor. That is why ASA also says the grade 1 monitor is a qualified anesthesiologist who is present at all the times in the OT. So trust your intuitions. Thank you.